Is the United States government manipulating and even worse, controlling the weather using NEXRAD Doppler radar installations? It sounds like a conspiracy theory until you realize the U.S. government has these installations all over the United States. Watch.
Was Hurricane Helene's path and behavior just the result of natural processes and climate patterns, or was it manipulated? The circular blue flashes seen in this video are frequency transmissions from the NEXRAD network of transmitter installations. All available science evidence makes clear that atmospheric frequency transmissions can and do have a repelling effect on air masses, especially if and when the air masses have been seeded with electrically conductive nanoparticles. The brighter the blue flash from a frequency transmission installation, the more pronounced and powerful the repelling effect on any air mass or storm in the vicinity will be. Where there are no blue flashes, there is no transmission, thus no repelling effect, thus no resistance for a migrating storm. Translation: a migrating storm will be hindered from moving toward frequency transmissions and will easily migrate in a direction with no transmissions. So again, I ask, was Hurricane Helene's path and behavior just an act of nature, or was it engineered? You decide.
Well, the voice you heard there is Dane Wigington. He is the lead researcher and administrator for the website geoengineeringwatch.org. He's the executive producer of the groundbreaking climate engineering documentary called The Dimming. I encourage all of you to watch it. Dane has devoted the last 20 years of his life to constant research on the issue of covert global climate engineering operations and the effort to expose and halt these criminals. Right, so now we're dealing with all of the debris from Hurricane Helene that's still there in big piles. We're talking all sorts of, plywood and wood, 2x4s, and car debris and shingles and everything else. It's just in big piles right now. Aluminum siding, things like that, all in big piles, which could be then projectiles for this new storm. So perfect fodder for this new storm, perfect projectiles. So overnight, Hurricane Milton went from a Category 3 to a 4 within an hour, and then within another hour, it became a Category 5. According to Into Thin Air, it may be the fastest move ever seen in the Gulf of Mexico. The thing is turning into a beast, and it's heading right into another storm that could also merge and then smash right into Florida. Bizarre swirling radar anomalies are also once again present here, just like we saw with Hurricane Helene. These same weird patterns from these radar signatures, and it's asking many people right now, or people are wondering if this hurricane is being controlled or geoengineered on purpose. We put up a poll here so far. 94% of you in our audience, 94% say that this is that weather can be manipulated for sure. So take a look. This is the hurricane track over the last few hours. It's highly unusual for the hurricane to intensify from a Category 3 to a 4 to a 5 within 1 hour. Meaning it became a Category 3 and then 1 hour later became a Category 4 and then less than an hour later becomes a Category 5. Very rare. Media, of course, across Florida right now telling you to get out right now.
The Ready, Set, Go is a great idea of who's going to be feeling impacts, but you'll notice areas here where we're talking about evacuations and final preparations, maybe boarding up the house. You have areas in through Pinellas County, by the way. They do have evacuations, and they're also in some areas like St. Pete Beach. They're turning off sewage and water. Tomorrow morning, it's all off. So that's another reason to go.
Yeah, exactly. Think of this as like a stoplight. They stop what you're doing in your everyday life and get ready. Get your medications, get whatever you need, right, to make sure that you are set, your family's set, your pets are set, your evacuation route, in case you don't know as well. Hillsborough County.
So get out now is the message there. And before you call it conspiracy theory, we did a whole deep dive last week here on the show about the U.S. government's history of using weather modification. Into Thin Air notices some very similar radar anomalies. We saw this with Helene back again with this very same storm, the same exact radar signatures that he's picked up on. Watch.
All right, let's take a look at Florida, and already it's looking like a disco party is going on. A lot of different radar activity going on. We got spikes here going all the way into the Gulf. Heavy lines up in this area, and then, of course, we have the one we saw with Hurricane Helene right here going off again. Now, of course, remember, these are just theories that we're talking about here, entertainment purposes only, because no way is weather modification real, right, everybody? Anyway.
Right.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Just entertainment purposes only. There's no weather modification, except there is. And we've seen a number of these NEXRAD radar systems going off in bursts and basically directing Hurricane Helene into an area where the NEXRAD radar systems were not going off, being directed in a path. Of course, a lot of discussion about HARP and how all of this plays into it. If you talked about the South Pole Station, the Ice Cube neutrino machine basically being HARP on steroids, how would it or likely be used with Hurricane Milton, Hurricane Helene in the United States?
I believe it would just be simple delivery of energy. That it is that simple. These systems themselves, we're just observing Mother Nature and the flow of her energies. We call it a storm. We call it a hurricane. It's just a matter of practice through the application and delivery from systems like this that have copious amounts of power available to deliver. It's just a matter of playing around and learning the targeting and reaction. It's application of intention and checking the reaction. And this is something that they seem to have gotten dialed in, whether it be through one singular system at the South Pole, or like we're seeing with the NEXRAD systems, or potentially through integrating with other HARP platforms around the world. We just need to start to appreciate that this is exactly how it works and how simple it can be. Energy can be delivered wirelessly with great accuracy and impact, and we're witnessing it with our own eyes. And we need to start asking the right questions of the right people. And we need to stop being led by the nose by the misinformationists and disinformationists that, frankly, don't really have any skin in the game other than profiteering. It's a neutrino detector. Okay, well, what did it cost? And what's the price per neutrino detected? And what do we do with that information? What's the value in science that's the return on the investment for the average mortgage payer that's investing into this? What do we care where neutrinos are coming from? It doesn't seem to have much logic and reasoning to what we're being told its function is. But if we realize that there are rogue factions in control of the world's largest phased array transmitter that can deliver copious amounts of energy anywhere on the planet to manipulate storms, to increase them, to steer them, to create earthquakes. It was many decades ago that the Air Force put together a plan to control the weather by 2025. This is a report that's available on the internet now. This is a report that was handed to me in great secrecy many years ago. I was told to never get caught with it, but it stated very clearly that weather warfare and weather manipulation was the battlefield of the future, that he who controls the weather controls the planet. I do not believe that the United States government is the only faction working in this capacity. I do not even believe that nation states are the only factions working in this capacity. In my experience, nation states are puppets to military-industrial corporation contractors. Those folks run the world.
Hillary Clinton just warned us all that we're about to see a major black swan event. Oh, she just got her wish, as early voting, of course, starts in a number of different states across the country. And the United States Postal Service just posting that we are 36 days until Election Day, and they have now suspended service to many of the zip codes due to this storm. In Georgia, 42 zip codes, North Carolina, 39 zip codes. These are all, of course, solid red areas, solid red states. So maybe your zip code is affected right here on the screen. Take a look. Yeah, USPS done. So no service right now. And we banks out, cell phones out. So trying to get access to your banking information. Earlier, trying to log into Twitter using your cell phone. No good. Let's talk about the voting issue here. So we've got the weather manipulation piece of this, which a lot of people are wondering if it's going on with this Category 5 storm. Similar weird radar anomalies that are also happening. Let's talk about this voting issue, though, which is being largely ignored right now. So North Carolina is ground zero, guys, for a Harris-Walz victory. If they can take over North Carolina, in a way, President Trump narrowly won North Carolina. If they can take over North Carolina, they'll win this presidency. Bottom line. And that's why they've already made North Carolina priority one this year already. President Biden touring in North Carolina. Harris rolled out her economic plan in North Carolina. They've been putting a lot of resources into North Carolina, television ads, marketing, and of course, campaign stops. So all it takes, Democrats need 23,000 votes. 23,000 votes. That's all the swaying needs to happen in order for Harris and Walz to win. And even Politico right away, after Helene hit, called this out and said, Helene hit Trump strongholds in Georgia, North Carolina. It could swing the election. Diving into the numbers, yeah, guess what? If these individuals don't have homes, they don't have it away, they're not there anymore. They've been, gone to Ohio to stay with relatives. They're not there for their absentee ballots because these post offices are now closed. We identified here about a week and a half ago here on the show all of the zip codes where these post offices are now closed. Mail not being distributed to these areas. Polling places without heat and electricity and without running water, which means they are closed. Don't take my word for it. Take liberal CNN's word for it. They're detailing all of these polling places which are closed. Election officials in Georgia, North Carolina, Florida work right now amid Hurricane Helene fallout. Election officials in Georgia, North Carolina, Florida working quickly to ensure voters can still securely cast early ballots despite the devastating storm impacts of Hurricane Helene that have in some cases left them without power, water, and cell service. Potential solutions in the affected counties of the 3 states which could determine the White House could include extra polling places, extended early voting, and making it easier to drop off mail ballots. We have no power. We have no water. Cell service is limited. So right now the concern is a delay in getting the absentee ballots mailed out. A delay in receiving the mail. The executive director of Augusta-Richmond County Board of Elections in Georgia told CNN. Doss said some of the county's 43 polling locations could be unable to be used. And that's just putting it conservatively, just in Georgia. Not to mention the dozens upon dozens in North Carolina, which are unusable and have been destroyed. Where are these people going to vote? How are they going to vote? How are they going to receive these votes in the mail? Maybe of these Trump voters.
Reinstate the Pony Express.
Right. I was thinking Paul Revere. Do we have any of those archetypes that can trot it in on horseback?
Well, you're making fun of it, but last week we saw that they're bringing in mules. They're actually using mules right now to try to transport supplies into these hard-hit areas of North Carolina. We have a lot of sources in that area that are working different angles of the story. We're going to bring more to you on the supply angle and what's going on in North Carolina this week. Some great journalists who are there that we've been corresponding with, and what's actually happening on the ground with the number of additional body bags that have been ordered. We're hearing reports of up to 4,000 body bags that have been ordered. They're still finding bodies in trees, in cars, all over the place, and they don't have power. They don't have a way to get supplies in, and there's also, of course, reports of sabotage of these supplies. And this was last night, where 2 black helicopters came in at a donation center in western North Carolina where they had lined up supplies. These helicopters came in and just on purpose hung over this particular area, flies into the area and uses rotor washes and destroys all of this stuff, and then takes off. Disappears. They've been trying to find out who these helicopters were. They can't find out. And this was not one of the resupplies helicopters. These were unrelated to the supply helicopters. They came in and destroyed the supplies and then took off. And you had individuals there who were trying to get these supplies out to people in North Carolina. There's been multiple reports like this of sabotage of these supplies. They dipped down, performed a rotor wash, which seemed deliberate, then flew off, destroyed a lot of the staging area, harming the people directly below. One was a canine security officer who was doing sweeps of these vehicles to make sure nothing nefarious was coming through. So they're asking, were they special forces, private contractors? They don't know. And then others were trying to locate through their flight trajectory and their flight tracking. They don't know who they are, calling them ghosts, basically. So what the hell is going on? It's hard not to feel like we're all being played right now. Right?
Yes, I feel like that all the time.
I mean, you have 2 hurricanes that are, with the weird radar anomalies. You have all of these areas which have never been hit by this type of flooding in the mountains, areas completely cut off and polling places shut down now, conveniently destroyed. And all you need is 23,000 votes in North Carolina for Harrison Walz to win the election. I mean, it feels like we're being played right now. So anyway,
let us know what you think of that.
Yeah, our thoughts are with the folks of Florida right now, too, as well as all of the people devastated in North Carolina and Georgia and other parts of Florida. What are you guys planning to do? I lived in Orlando, Florida during the 2004 Charlie, I think it was Ivan, and I forget the other one. There was like 4 major hurricanes that came across within like 4 weeks. It was devastating. And they all crisscrossed right before the election, right through the middle of the state. And they came right through, and it was utter destruction through Tampa all the way up through Orlando up into Jacksonville. So it was devastating. And they're talking about that this power could be out in these areas for months. They might not be able to restore power for months. This is unbelievable. I know when I lived in Florida, we didn't have power for weeks at a time. And the blistering heat of August in Florida, it was miserable. It was absolutely miserable.
And you think about the supplies, the people who need let's say a diabetic who needs their insulin, things like that. Like, how is this going to actually affect the lives of people who depend on the supply chain?
All right. Well, since World War II, the United States government have been able to manipulate the weather. That's a fact. You can look it up. Since the 1960s, we've been able to control and even weaponize the weather. That's a fact. You can look it up.
We did it in Vietnam. Yeah.
Exactly. And in the 1970s, the United States Congress put forth a bill to regulate weather manipulators. That's right. In case you had some sort of a weather manipulation tool, the United States government wanted you to register it with the United States government and get a license for it. That's how much we were doing this in the United States. So we'll come back to that part of the story in a second. But first, when Hurricane Katrina destroyed New Orleans and the Gulf Coast in 2005, a lot of people got very rich. I don't know if you know that. That story hasn't really been covered or talked much about. Millionaires, in fact, were made as a result of it. Millionaires were made almost overnight as a result of this destruction. 80% of the land, of course, was destroyed in New Orleans at the time, and all the way up through the Mississippi into Biloxi and everything else was wiped away. Most of it purchased by property developers. And black residents of New Orleans at the time weren't stupid. They knew exactly what was happening to them. Here's a nice paycheck. Now leave and never come back. We'll take your land. Don't worry. Get out of here. Take the town of Point Cadet, a hurricane-battered blue-collar neighborhood in East Biloxi, Mississippi. Homes were totally flattened. Casinos swooped in, bought up all of the land. Casino operators snatched up tracts of land from property owners whose homes were flattened by the hurricane on August 29th, 2005. Now this area, tourist destination, right? And nice casinos, restaurants, nice pier, all of that, nice shopping and everything. No more pesky homeowners with riverfront property. Just like Maui, Lahaina, right? Where massive wildfires took out all the homes, people that lived there for well over 100 years. A lot of generational families in those areas now just wiped away. Perfect tourist destination properties in that area. The people that own those houses, of course, are totally inconvenient. Get out of here. We need this oceanfront property for new resorts. On November 13th, 1946, pilot Curtis Talbot, working for the General Electric research laboratory, he climbed up to the top of a local peak, 14,000 feet high near Schenectady. I love that name. Near Schenectady, New York. Talbot, along with another researchers from GE, released just 3 pounds of dry ice into the clouds, high above Schenectady. And suddenly it began to swirl. Suddenly ice crystals formed, and then it started to snow. Big snow was a result of that. Obviously, this is not footage from 1946, but this is snow. And it was pretty crazy. This was the first time they had created the first man-made snowstorm just after World War II. Then experiments continued into rain and manipulation of tornadoes and hurricanes, and it came quietly. Then came Project Cirrus, which has been recently declassified. 1947, U.S. experiment along with the United States Navy, the Army, General Electric. They attempted to control hurricanes using cloud seeding. It was aimed at reducing the severity of storms. But guess what? It did the exact opposite, and efforts actually redirected a hurricane right towards Georgia. It's pretty remarkable, actually. You can see look at the path of this hurricane. They started seeding the clouds after the hurricane had already gone through the southern tip of Florida, and it was heading out to sea, moving away from Florida. It literally redirected it away from Florida. Then once they started seeding the clouds, look at this. It redirected it back into Georgia, bringing devastation to Georgia. It was gone. It was out to sea. Let's bring it back using our cloud seeding. The idea was to lessen the severity of it. Of course, they did the exact opposite. After this, by the way, GE quit this, said they're done because they were worried about lawsuits, legal ramifications of this. But of course, the U.S. government continued it. The United States Army, the United States Navy continued this opportunity. In 1953, in fact, the President of the United States launched the Advisory Committee on Weather Control. They realized that controlling the weather and weaponizing the weather was more powerful than a nuclear bomb. Why? Because after a nuclear bomb, you render the ground completely useless. But using weather is just a temporary inconvenience. And you can manipulate it in any way that you want. In the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union ramped up their weather manipulation efforts, weaponizing these tools. These superpowers realized that by controlling the weather, they could destabilize entire regions without firing a single bullet. Take Operation Popeye, for example. Get your spinach out here. This was during the Vietnam War. Is a prime example. Through cloud seeding, U.S. forces in Vietnam extended the monsoon season over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, creating floods that hampered enemy supply lines. This was the first real-world application of weather manipulation for warfare. The weaponization of weather. And
but I'm sure they don't do that anymore.
I'm sure they don't at all. All the supply lines were stuck on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and the U.S. bombed the shit out of them. They were stuck. Perfect destruction. You can actually still see the craters today along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. All of the bombings that happened in that mud-soaked, in that mud-soaked incident. These programs continued in earnest, of course. The United States and Russia, then the Soviet Union, both explored weather manipulation during the Cold War. The U.S. considered cloud seeding to break up tornadoes or even to induce drought on the Soviet Union. We're going to dry you up. No food production in the Soviet Union. The U.S. also considered melting polar ice caps to alter climate patterns against the Soviets. Fast forward to today, and we have to wonder, have these programs quietly just sort of continued? Advanced to the point where entire storms can be created or intensified at will? Take Hurricane Helene, for example. On the surface, it seems like, it's just another storm here, right? Another intense storm. But there are clear signs this could be the result of human intervention. The erratic nature of this path, the unprecedented rainfall, we're talking over 40 trillion gallons. 40 trillion gallons of water. Unprecedented amount of water that hit this area. The concentrated devastation in key areas, by the way, very specific areas. It's not just, could it be, nature just acting unpredictably? It doesn't seem so. It's possible that we are seeing modern day weather warfare. An investigative journalist over Into Thin Air pointed out a number of radar beam anomalies. How am I saying this? Anomalies. My God, why? I have one of those moments where you can't say it. Mm-hmm. With Hurricane Helene. Watch this and watch these radar beams, which is stunning.
All right, everyone, welcome back. We are waiting the arrival of major Category 4 Hurricane Helene. This thing is an absolute monster. But take a look at this anomaly that's shooting down almost to where we're going to see landfall. It's very interesting. I'm curious to see if this thing actually lands right on top of where we think landfall is going to be. Now, there's something else kind of shooting out here underneath this layer of moisture over the southeast. It looks like it's coming from either northern Florida or a radar tower in southern Georgia. But the main one right here, look at this big beam that shoots down right to about here. That's where we're expecting landfall, give or take. Now, something even more interesting, I want to show you on a more detailed chart. All right, I'll show you once here and then we'll zoom in, but take a look. It's coming from up in this area and it shoots down right to about here where we're expecting landfall. I'll move forward and you'll pretty much see it right away. There it is now. Boom, right here. Okay, so now we're going to zoom in and see exactly where this thing points to, because that is not your normal beam that you see coming from these radar. And it's definitely coming from the state of Georgia, probably underneath this mess here. It's coming this way and there's a cross of that other beam either coming from northern Florida or southern Georgia. All right, this is about as close as we're going to get. We're going to see one anomaly.
Yeah. So it's not something to discount. Go down this massive rabbit hole. Want to go down this massive rabbit hole with patent applications that have been in the works with sound, using sound technology to redirect weather patterns, using cloud seeding, using these types of beams to redirect clouds. Unbelievable. It's not something to discount, especially when the people of North Carolina right now, specifically Asheville, rightly want to know why suddenly there was a massive hurricane that struck their land, bringing 40 trillion gallons of water. Water they say they've never seen before in the state's history. Back in 2001, of course, you have patent application publications for hurricane and tornado control devices. Now, this patent back in 2001 was sort of languished and then went abandoned until it was picked back up again and sold off to another individual. And you can read all of these patents. You can see the different technology, the abstract. A method is disclosed for affecting the formation and or direction of low atmospheric weather systems. Audio generators are positioned to project sound waves towards a peripheral area of a weather system. The sound waves are generated at a frequency to affect the formation of weather systems in a manner to disrupt, enhance, or direct the formation. Okay. Sure, it's all just total coincidence, though, right? But I think Eve for America sums it up nicely with her cup of coffee, questioning all of this. And this is a rabbit hole you can deeply go down if you'd like to. But the people of North Carolina who are still looking for victims today and wondering what happens to their land now that all of these towns are wiped away, will the government swoop in and hand them a check for using eminent domain? Here's all of your money. Here's some money. Get out of here, because there's large mineral deposits underneath your house. There's large swaths of useful resources that the United States government wants, or not just the United States government, but large corporations want, just like we saw in Hurricane Katrina, just like we're seeing in Maui. There are no coincidences. Here's Eve for America. I like this.
Can I tell you what I find suspicious as shit? That one of the areas affected by Hurricane Helene is the world's largest lithium deposit, and the DoD just entered into an agreement with this company right here to mine lithium for electric cars starting in 2025. Now that area is completely devastated. This was a $90 million agreement between the DoD and this company right here to get Kings Mountain, North Carolina lithium mine up and running by 2030. If that area has been inundated, is in a disaster zone, then the government can come in and do eminent domain, and they can pay you what it was worth 5 years ago rather than what it's worth right now. Imagine that your home has turned into a watery lot and the government comes to you and says, hey, I'll pay you what you paid for it. You're gonna take it and you're gonna go, right? What do you think is gonna happen right here now that they want this lithium mine up and running by 2025, 2030 at the latest? Back in 1947, we had the Florida-Georgia hurricane, or Hurricane 9, and it was the first hurricane to be targeted for weather modification. What happened was General Electric, the US Navy, the Army, the Air Force, they poured dry ice into this hurricane using airplanes to see what would happen. Would they slow it down? Well, what happened was it slowed down a little bit, but it turned west really sharp. Let me show you. This is the path that the hurricane took in 1947. Does it look similar to you? Probably not. It's a coincidence, right? Moving on. I'm sure this is just another coincidence, but do you know who owns the most shares in that lithium mine? BlackRock and Vanguard.
Get the heck out of here. Do you just get the heck out?
You get the heck out of here, Eve.
I cannot.
I love Eve with her cup of coffee. Yeah,
we noticed you were homeless. May we the government offer you to continue to be? How about that?
Right.
That's our
Here's a little
final
check.
offer.
You're homeless now.
That's the plot of Twisters. I'm sorry if I gave that away, but like
weather manipulation. Yeah,
truth
exactly.
As fiction. Okay. Can't.
Also too, you could say, well, what's going on? Maybe the Brown Mountain Lights there in North Carolina, not too far from Asheville. Like what's happening there? The mystery of the Brown Mountain Lights for many, many years. So who knows?
Are we?
But we're living in strange times.
Are we starting to realize that maybe BlackRock and Vanguard are not good companies?
I think we're starting to come around on that. Yeah,
is that
starting
to get Mr. Luthor?
Like two or three more conspiracies, and I'm going to start thinking that they're probably not on the up and up.
Right. Yeah. I thought they were good guys, and then they popped up in that whole Ukraine war thing, and they just bought up the whole country of Ukraine after this war started. Yeah. It's very strange. Yeah, it's very strange.
They're hiring shooters for their videos.
Right. Yeah. The people that have been involved in the assassinations of Donald Trump.
It's not uncommon in video production to hire shooters, but those are usually camera people, not gunners.
Right, not actually gunners that wind up and end up trying to shoot at President Trump. I know it's very convenient. Other people in the chat believe that maybe it has nothing to do with the minerals there. It could just be the fact that these are all Trump voting areas that are suddenly wiped out. And of course, as we reported earlier this week, the post office has suspended service and voting is beginning, of course. So 34 days until the election, any kind of early mail-in ballots, the U.S. Postal Service has stopped in over 49 different zip codes now. So no mail-in ballots, none of that in these regions as well. So boy, here we go. There is, and here's a whistleblower who's come forward. She worked on these projects, and she's suing and she's suing the federal government for lying to the American people. Listen.
And she's a military veteran, right?
Yes, I was in the U.S. Air Force for 9 years.
Wow. And you came out and blew the whistle on geoengineering, things that you witnessed were going on. Can you give us the real nutshell?
Absolutely. Basically, I had heard of what many people know as the term chemtrails. And I worked in a job called bioenvironmental engineering. And I thought that was insane. And why would we do something like that? Modify the weather by using hazardous materials in our atmosphere. So, and actually the process of trying to debunk it or disprove it, I realized it was actually coming right out of my office, as I was one of the people that was approving the chemicals. And it really shook the core of my oath. And I did a lot of sampling, did a lot of investigation, and I blew the whistle and I got out. And I've now used my credentials, my oath, and my powers for good to help people understand it's very real. It's now openly admitted. There are multiple forms of weather modification. I specifically found the one of stratospheric aerosol injection. And collectively around the globe, we have to understand that it is now being admitted because they're saying it's combating climate change. Well, the climate change we need to be worried about is man-made climate engineering, also known as geoengineering.
Yeah, entertainment purposes only. So don't take her word for it. Take the former head of the CIA talking about it, how it's the most exciting weapon he's ever seen. This is John Brennan.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly.
Yeah, so the CIA is loving this program as well. When you were at the South Pole Station, you witnessed this ice cube neutrino machine in action. So it goes deep and it's and much larger than HARP. And I guess just walk us through what they would be using this for. How would they be manipulating the weather? How would they be manipulating and targeting earthquakes around the world? Why would they be doing this? And who is in control of the South Pole Station at this point? Is it the United States government? You were a contractor with Raytheon when you were there. Is it a private enterprise? Who is controlling it?
Great questions. First and foremost, one of the things that the former crew members had emphasized to me to try to get people to understand as I'm trying to get this information out there is that you have to understand it's just very easy now to deliver that energy anywhere on the planet. It's not challenging.
Like they can pick a spot. They can They can pick a spot in Iran and they can just dial it in on the computer and launch an earthquake.
Deliver the energy that instigates it. The term that people should become familiar with is earthquake induction or earthquake inducing. So similar to like when you go on the internet and you Google chemtrails, right? You're going to get a whole bunch of baloney that says chemtrails are garbage, blah, blah. But if you Google the term stratospheric aerosol injection, you'll start to find all of the science of what's really going on when they crisscross our skies. So
and the patents and all of that.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So
right.
if you look up inducing earthquakes or earthquake induction, you will become privy to a sea of information and science that supports the existence of this technology. It's just that available. People just need to start paying attention to what's going on in the world around them and this disparity in technology. As far as who's running the facility, I'm not 100% sure. This was part of that conversation that I had in Washington, D.C., is because it seems like these, unacknowledged special access programs, USAP, which anybody who's paying close attention, USAP is the actual title of the Antarctic program. It's the United States Antarctic Program, USAP. It is a USAP program by definition. So they are being very deceptive as to what the secondary and tertiary capacities are for this massive phased array system, and they're just pumping it out to the general population as if it's operating under the auspices of science. Of course, things like that have to be secreted away. They're not going to be running around saying we have the world's largest directed energy weapons system at the South Pole Station in Antarctica, because first and foremost, it would breach the Antarctic treaties. And people would say, oh, well, they would never do that. Well, study Greenland and look what happened down there when the United States of America was sneaking nuclear missile bases into Greenland without telling the local authorities. This is an activity that our nation and many other nations are more than happy to break the rules every single chance they get.
And the contractors that are handling, like the basics on these places, like the commissaries and the janitorial and stuff like that, are freaking defense contractors. Like, why is Raytheon there? Why is Lockheed Martin there? What sense does
They're
that
there
make?
for sanitation purposes? Like, literally, plumbing and sanitation services are handled by Lockheed Martin? What? And Raytheon? Come on, people, wake up, please. Again, so I know you guys are awakened, but so many people aren't. And
but also the energy with which the media is denying this out of pocket is concerning, and it tells you, oh, there's something they don't want you to see there. Let's look there then. It's like when your mom's like, don't look under there, don't look in that cabinet.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, and the military's use of these technologies down there is astonishing. So Dane Wigington joins me now. Dane, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you for your voice in this most dire issue that too few are aware of. And regarding climate engineering, it's not speculation or theory or hypothesis. It's a matter of the historical record with mountains of documents to back up the fact that these programs have been ongoing for decades.
Ongoing for decades. And I think a lot of Americans are like, this sounds like a conspiracy theory. It's absolutely not. You broke a big story this week that lawmakers who were briefed on these weather weapons concluded that what happened in North Carolina, Hurricane Helene, was engineered by the Department of Defense. Can you elaborate on that?
Geoengineering Watch is communicating with congressmen from the Carolinas, from Connecticut, from Tennessee, and they are all very aware of these programs being ongoing and operational. And I want to delineate this. There's a very marked difference between, quote, weather modification, which many people are familiar with, single engine, propeller driven airplane with a few flares on the wings. That is not this. With climate engineering, we have, for example, a KC-135 military tanker can distribute 100 tons of toxic material into the skies, the seed, cloud moisture in a single payload. So they're two very different animals, and the local publicized weather modification operations are simply used as a smokescreen to mask the unimaginably larger climate intervention operations. So, and again, we have, going back decades, congressional documents at geoengineeringwatch.org. One is 800 pages long, outlining the scope and scale of these operations, even going back to the 70s and before, and the intergovernmental cooperation, even between governments with otherwise adversarial relations, is stated as such in this document. Document calls for blanket legal immunity for anyone and everyone involved with these programs. So again, we have film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning on and off. This is not condensation we see in our skies. All military tankers and all commercial aircraft are outfitted with a high bypass turbofan jet engine, jet-powered fan. 90% of the air that moves through that engine is not combusted. So we should see, except under rare circumstances, we should see nothing behind these aircraft. And we're just asking people to investigate the data, connect the dots. This is absolutely ongoing.
So let's talk about, I want to talk about Helene in a minute here, but right now we've got Hurricane Milton bearing down on Florida and overnight, we see this small sort of secondary storm now in front of it, almost like a twin storm about to hit Florida. Then overnight, we also saw these massive wildfires breaking out in the Tetons in Wyoming. So, a lot of Americans are so frustrated right now. They're sitting there saying, why would our government do this to us? First of all, let's talk about Milton. Is there any weather modification by the government being used or directing of this storm into Florida from your evidence?
Short answer, yes. And if I could back up to why would our government do this? Why wouldn't they do this when this has been business as usual for decades? If we look at what the Washington Post published all the way back in 1977, that the U.S. military had conducted no less than 239 open-air biological tests on innocent, unknowing U.S. civilians. That's what we know about going back that far. If we look at the nuclear bomb detonations in Nevada, we have peer-reviewed study now to prove that those detonations eventually caused no less than 500,000 downstream deaths from the fallout for U.S. civilians. That's peer-reviewed study. So again, for those that can't imagine that the people who actually control our government, which I would argue is not any elected official, it's those who control the flow of money, this is business as usual. And why wouldn't they do this? Why wouldn't they use weather as a covert weapon of control? If we look all the way back, Clayton, to film footage of Lyndon Johnson in 1962, former U.S. President Lyndon Johnson, 1962, on film, on the record, ranting like a lunatic, stating we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then, 62 years ago, and, quote, he who controls the weather controls the world. So again, this is not speculation. And we have other governments like China openly announcing their massive weather modification operations. And yet if you bring the subject up here in the U.S., suddenly you're marginalized. That needs to change. In regards to Milton, there's no question it's being manipulated. And there's a global network of frequency transmitters that have a repelling effect on the air mass that is heavily seeded with electrically conductive elements. And if you saw the track of Milton, it got hung up a bit on the Yucatan Peninsula. There's a massive transmitter in Cancun, and we recorded the transmissions from that, trying to bump that storm back onto track. And again, once it gets near enough to landfall in the U.S., where the NextRad network then becomes the controlling element, we've recorded this again and again and again. Even with hurricanes like Harvey, for example, Clayton, you might remember 7 days in advance, they seemed to know where it was going to go and that it was going to sit there for days. How could they possibly know that unless that's the plan? And we recorded Harvey. We recorded the actual transmissions with Harvey, Ian, Maria, Michael, all these hurricanes and their interaction with the transmitters. This is patented technology. So again, it's not like we're speculating.
No, speculating at all. So these NextRad, we showed at the very beginning here what happened with Helene. When you have these NextRad frequency transmitters, where are these? Are these on military bases, these installations? What exactly do they look like? And how are they being operated? And I guess by whom? Is it the Department of Defense?
What we know from, for example, congressional documents is there are many agencies involved with the overall operations of these programs, but they're all compartmentalized. So the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. There's certainly central coordination for the NextRad network, and that's visible from the manner in which you can see these transmitters energizing. They're clearly completely coordinated. We do have some of the transmitters on bases, but some are not on bases. And it's even with what we think are just new cell towers going up everywhere, we know from those installing those towers that many of those installations have 10 times more power being supplied to them than they need for communications. And we can see their effect on water vapor loops. They are affecting the flow of precipitation. They are absolutely a part of these operations. And Clayton, if you've ever seen the herringbone patterns, the perfectly synchronized or aligned herringbone patterns in the clouds in the sky, have you ever seen that? And sometimes you can see those in perpendicular directions, and that's indicative of overlapping transmissions from different transmitters. And you can't have that atmospherically otherwise. And so we have the entire meteorological community, their so-called science community, pretending that there's all these new cloud formations, that all these anomalous phenomenon we see in our skies are just something new that nobody ever noticed for 100 years. And they name 18 new clouds going back several years. And I mean, the blatantness with which these programs are ongoing is staggering. And people think, well, everyone would be lining up to talk about this, right? The experts would all be coming out of the shadows to admit to this. What happens to whistleblowers? What happened to Assange? What happened to John Carrico, the person who blew the whistle on the illegal torture programs? He's the only one that went to jail for it. So no, people aren't going to be lining up. And we have right now, Clayton, we have an illegal federal gag order on all National Weather Service and all NOAA employees, the nation's weathermen. Why in the world would you have an illegal gag order on those agencies, forbidding them from discussing any of the agency operations?
Well, and Americans sitting there saying, why would they do this? Why would the government direct this into, we can talk about Hurricane Helene now, into this section of Western North Carolina? And if you follow Occam's razor, the shortest, most direct response makes sense, right? And if it's the Department of Defense directing these weather weapons, and they don't want Trump voters to vote for Trump, I mean, maybe that's the direct line here. Why would they do that? Well, would it be to end the wars in Ukraine? Would it be to end the wars in the Middle East? They're going to be put out of business, tens of billions of dollars at stake if Trump becomes president. I mean, is that a leap too far?
No, I don't think it is. I would just simply add that there are other layers as well. So we have Piedmont Lithium in North Carolina that was hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars because of the roadblock of the owners that were not cooperating, did not want that mine to proceed. We have Piedmont Lithium's contracts with the DOD in 2025 that were coming due. So we have the DOD pursuing that lithium. And again, why would we think that this kind of operation wouldn't be conducted by those who actually control the power in Washington? And I, again, would argue that's those ultimately who print the money. And we have other historical records of this, Clayton. For example, immediately after 9/11, we had General Wesley Clark, the former NATO Supreme Commander, with a list of countries that were to be targeted because of that event, a list that clearly existed before that event ever occurred. Subsequently, every one of those countries underwent a once in 1,000 year drought. That's statistically impossible without climate intervention. And to back this up, we have the leaders of those countries, in the case of Iran, on the floor of the UN, stating emphatically, NATO is cutting off our precipitation. And they can see with their weather monitoring equipment what's going on upstream. So again, why would we think this isn't going on? We could go back further to Project Popeye in Vietnam in the 60s, where the U.S. military was so successful at the flow of precipitation over that country that by the 70s, there were international treaties forbidding weather warfare. Not that anybody pays any attention to that. So again, for Americans that think that this wouldn't be ongoing or we don't have the technology for this, it's simply ridiculous. We have patents going back for weather modification all the way back to the 1800s. We have about 200 at geoengineeringwatch.org, 200 plus. It's an extensive list of patents and new ones all the time for everything from hurricane modification to precipitation control to chemical ice nucleation. Clayton, have you seen how much hail is falling that's the size of baseball and softballs of late?
Yeah.
That's not nature.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. So many people posting on social media saying they've never seen storms like this before. They've never seen, they're filming it continuously for minutes at a time with lightning going off every few seconds. Traditional thunderstorms, you see lightning maybe every few minutes. But for it to be going off, it looks like something out of a movie. It looks like something out of a Lord of the Rings trailer or something like that. So we're seeing all sorts of different patterns, and people are saying that they've never seen storms like this. Are they right, or are they just conspiracy theorists?
I mean, again, this is a matter of the emperor has no clothes. Again, we need to use our sense of reason. It's absolutely occurring. And as far as the excessive lightning now, we have an ionized atmosphere. It's much more electrically conductive. These particulates are electrically conductive. And we're talking about, based on our lab tests, working with the University of Minnesota, hundreds of lab tests over that state, and extrapolating the amount of climate engineering elements in the precipitation and projecting that globally, it appears as if somewhere in the range of 40 to 60 million tons of toxic electrically conductive nanoparticles are being dispersed into our skies. That creates more static buildup. Again, more electrical conductivity in the clouds. Now we have the clouds being blasted with microwave transmission. So it's the atmosphere is being treated as a physics lab and a war zone at this point. And on the chemical ice nucleating elements, which are used to temporarily and toxically cool down surface temperatures in various regions. In fact, that happened. That's another layer for Helene. We had an anomalously less warm region in that part of the U.S., while the rest of the U.S., for example, where I live in Northern California, it's been 100 degrees plus for about 6 months with no rain. And the no rain part is absolutely a result of climate engineering as well. We can see what they're doing on satellite imagery. It cuts off the precipitation to the west, and that plugs into the wildfire scenario. All these puzzle pieces fit together completely. And on the chemical ice nucleation part, if your listeners search Lake Michigan ice balls, for example, look at the photos of what we don't see on Matrix television, 75-pound perfectly spherical ice balls covering the shores of Lake Michigan. And this is happening in the Baltic Sea, the Arctic. That's what happens with a chemically nucleated element. And for the massive hailstones, when you create this ice nucleation process far earlier, it builds up far faster. That's why you end up with that. And that's why now insurance companies suddenly are canceling everybody for hail damage, because now it's off the charts, just like the lightning.
Unbelievable. So let's talk about Milton here. And Dane, I'll get you, I want to be respectful of your time. Milton, right? This is about to hit. The weather modification here, you've seen evidence of that, the manipulation using these next-rad radar systems off of Cancun to get it back on track. It looked like it was going south, more towards Cancun in that direction. You say that it was pushed back to the north. And just can you talk about that? And then also, what is the goal with Florida? Why Florida, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's got to be a purpose for this. So why are they targeting Tampa specifically? Is there some reason that you've been able to identify, or is that not that's in the realm of speculation at this point?
At geoengineering.org, we are careful to only state what we can back up with data. So in regard to the agendas and objectives, there are likely many, and behind closed doors, whatever is going on there for the ultimate goal is difficult to state. What we can state with certainty is these operations are real, ongoing, they're patented processes, they're affecting these storms. And Clayton, if we go one step further, we've had for decades patented technologies to suppress these storms, to stop the convection. We have products like Dynamat designed to reduce the convection and pull the moisture to the surface at minimum. At absolute minimum. If they didn't want these storms to happen, they would not happen. And we're not stating on the spawning of these storms, the oceans are superheating. Nature can certainly spawn these storms, although with atmospheric pressure zone manipulation, which is absolutely ongoing. Again, for decades, this technology has existed. HARP, for example, in Alaska, many of your followers may know what that is. That's an ionosphere heater. It's a weapon of mass destruction. It's not some benign research facility. When you can transmit 3.5 million watts, 3.6 million watts into the electrically charged ionosphere, which causes an electrical chain reaction, superheats that layer of the atmosphere, causing the atmosphere to expand up and down, you can create and manipulate pressure zones on the surface. That in turn can affect storms like Milton or Helene. So they have the ability to make or break these storms however they form, and they have the ability to direct them. And the reason that normally now, Clayton, you've probably heard the term rapid intensification a lot lately with these storms. Right. So what we see now is an attempt to keep the storms from organizing too much too early, where they're over large bodies of water like the Gulf of Mexico, because they're much harder to steer. And perhaps we saw that with Milton, because as you know, Milton spun up much faster and stronger than they initially forecast. And that may have made it harder to steer, why it leaned to the southeast and hung up on the Yucatan Peninsula, and why they had to bump it off because it spun up more than they anticipated, perhaps. So again, there's two layers of the transmission manipulation. There's ionosphere heaters like HARP, of which there's about 100 around the globe. HARP's the biggest and the most powerful. And there's the NextRad network that manipulates from the ground level. And these, again, two separate aspects, but all frequency manipulation, and all doing what to the atmosphere? How do we know the overall effects? And what we do know from climate engineering sprayed dispersals in our sky. And again, these are aerosols. This is not condensation. Encourage people to look at the videos we have at geoengineeringwatch.org, up close, taken at altitude, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off. End of discussion. This is not condensation. So those particles have a oxidizing effect in the ozone layer, which is absolutely imploding. And if the sun feels extremely hot on your skin, on surfaces when you're in unobstructed light, it's not your imagination. We know we're getting UVC on the surface now. That's a DNA damaging spectrum. And we're getting some indication there may be X-ray. That's the final spectrum of UV radiation, indicating there's a functional collapse of the ozone layer close. It's being systematically denied. And it's not from hairspray cans, Clayton, as we were told going back several decades. That's simply smoke and mirrors. Those elements are harmful. CFCs are harmful, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to what climate engineering is doing. And that one aspect of this issue, if we had no other challenges on planet Earth, the functional collapse of the ozone layer alone is a near-term existential threat, and climate intervention operations are the core causal factor. And we have the whole climate science community admitting that if we geoengineer, and they propose, the entire global climate science community is saying they think we should put jets in the sky to spray light scattering particles. It will turn our skies hazy, dirty, milky white, just like we see. It will destroy the ozone layer, just like is happening. It will disrupt the hydrological cycle, exactly as what's occurring. But then they tell us none of this is actually happening yet. So again, we're living in an asylum at this point, and the ozone layer functional collapse alone is a near-term, and I mean extremely near-term, existential threat. And we're metering that, UV, Clayton. We had a former NASA contract engineer working directly for us. He just passed away with state-of-the-art equipment, but we're metering this, and it's not being disclosed by any official agency.
We're under attack. And I think you brought up, I want to get you out of here on this, Dane, which is the wildfires in Wyoming. Everyone's focused on Milton, but then we see massive wildfires breaking out, and you say they're connected.
They're completely connected. So whatever the source of ignition for the firestorms that are now occurring, we know that climate intervention operations are setting the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity. They're cutting off the hydrological cycle to massive swaths of forests, just like what happened in Canada last year. We have these particles, an incendiary dust. A primary element in climate engineering patents is aluminum, which we're all breathing, by the way. These are nanoparticles. They're very bioavailable. They're very bioaccumulative. They're building up in our systems, and we know this because everyone we test, hair, blood, urine, are packed with these metals. So this cutting off of the hydrological cycle, we have toxic rain because aluminum is toxic to all life forms, period. Bioavailable aluminum, toxic to all life forms. And for those, we get this from some in the science community that claim, well, aluminum is a common element in our strata. We should expect it everywhere. Not free-form aluminum. Free-form aluminum does not exist in nature. It must be mined and refined and dispersed in order for it to be there. And that makes it bioavailable and bioaccumulative. So we have soil microbiome dying. You've heard the trees are dying because of beetles, perhaps in the Western forest, and they blame everything on the beetles. Beetles are a symptom of a sick, dead, dying tree. The toxic rain is killing soil microbiome, killing root systems, which is killing the trees slowly. The UV is killing the trees from the top down. They're studying their stomata, their respiratory ports, so the forests don't smell like forest anymore. You have no smell in the forest because the trees are not breathing, they're not respirating, they're not absorbing carbon, they're not releasing oxygen. They're dying slowly and they're dormant. So we have more lightning. We just discussed that, right? We have more dry lightning now because the particles affect precipitation. So we have more sources of ignition. And all these elements, as part of climate engineering operations, that's what's setting the template for these fires to burn. And to add credence to this, we have peer-reviewed science study. We have an engineering wildfire section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. We have peer-reviewed study actually advocating for the intentional burning of northern latitude forests in order to provide temporary cooling, burning forests as a form of climate engineering to mimic the temporary toxic cooling effect of a volcano.
I mean, this is what Bill Gates has said publicly, that we should burn the forests in order to cool the planet. I mean, this is the madness that we're dealing with right now.
Absolute, total, utter insanity.
Dean, I'll get you out of here. I know I said I would get you out of here a second ago, but I just real quick here before we go, how bad do you think it's going to be with Hurricane Milton in Florida?
There's no way to know with certainty because the storm is being manipulated. They can knock the convection down at the last moment, or they can spin it up further. It's a matter of drafting that storm. and eliminating any wind shear at altitude. So again, when they're manipulating upper level wind currents, they have the ability to do this. And below the areas that are baking, and this is part of the wind current and pressure zone manipulation, you see in the west here, Clayton, I mean, we are baking. It's off the charts. And so climate engineering can augment that. And we're not denying other sources of damage to the planet at geoengineeringwatch.org. I want to make that clear. We recognize we've been really poor stewards of the planet, period. There's no way to really deny that. I mean, we're contaminating everything and cutting down forests, and there's a lot of problems that need to be addressed. But that being said, the intentional toxic intervention in the planet's life support systems is pounding the nails into our collective coffins, contaminating every breath we take. So under these high pressure domes, which I described earlier, when you have an ionosphere heater causing this electrical chain reaction in the ionosphere, pushing that air down under a high pressure heat dome, and that's what we're experiencing here in the West, and that can crush the convection in a cyclone as well. So they have so many levers at their disposal, Clayton, and we can, again, speculate about all the various agendas and objectives being carried out. But the fact that these operations are totally and completely out of control, off the rails, this is a headless, heartless, soulless cancer that is, at this point, again, completely out of control. And Clayton, I'm sure you hear people say, well, why would they do this to themselves? We hear it all the time at geoengineeringwatch.org. Why would they, aka those who print the money, do this to themselves? And I would point out, how much have they done to themselves already? Detonating 2,400 nuclear bombs that contaminated everything and everyone, including, quote, them, those behind these operations. We have Fukushima, triple nuclear meltdown, no technology to fix it, no end in sight. Chernobyl's about to rear its head again because the sarcophagus is disintegrating there. We have 442 nuke plants online right now. We have 60 more under construction. And even in that, even the potential of nuclear cataclysms is connected to the threat of climate engineering, because now that our compromised atmosphere, which we just talked about, the ozone layer disintegrating, if we have a massive CME or coronal mass ejection, which is inevitable at some point, something the size of the Carrington event that happened in the 1800s, that would shut down grids around the globe. Now we have nuclear plants everywhere that can't cool themselves. Now we have 100 Fukushimas or 200, game over. So from every conceivable direction, climate engineering, again, is the most dire and immediate threat we face short of nuclear cataclysm. And even with the nuclear cataclysm part, they're connected.
Dane Wigington has been my guest. You can learn more about all of this at geoengineeringwatch.org. Dane, I know it's been a busy time for you, and certainly our thoughts and prayers go out to the people who are in the path of this manipulated weather event in Florida right now. Dane, thank you so much for joining us. Well, why? Why are they directing the hurricane directly into Tampa and the Sarasota area specifically? Like, that's the question that stands out to many of us. Many people are wondering why Tampa specifically, though. Let's talk about Bill Gates, the man who wants to control the weather and reshape the way that you live. I mean, down to you not eating meat. He wants to take down forests in order to cool the climate. He wants to block out the sun. I mean, this is literally what he wants to do. He wants to test vaccines, of course, on unexpected individuals. Like, he loves this stuff right now. And this isn't some conspiracy stuff. This is fact. This is exactly what he's been doing. It's happening right now, and it's connected to something much bigger than just hurricanes and climate solutions. So stick with me here on this. Reshaping the way you live through weather manipulation is what Bill Gates wants to do. So let's start with this. Back in 2009, Bill Gates puts his name on a patent for controlling hurricanes. Yes, you can't make this stuff up. On hurricanes, watch.
When you hear the name Bill Gates, you probably think Microsoft founder. But now the billionaire may be known as the hurricane tamer. Gates is listed as one of 13 inventors on a patent filed for hurricane prevention methods. Hurricanes gain strength from condensation driven by warm surface water, which leads to greater wind speeds. Gates and his team plan to use a fleet of ships to cool warm surface water by mixing it with colder water from greater depths. They hope this will sap energy from growing storms, leading to weaker, less devastating hurricanes. The patent, which isn't expected to be approved for another 18 months, was submitted by C-REIT LLC, a sub-entity of an Intellectual Ventures and an invention acquisition and development firm.
What could go wrong? What could go wrong when Bill Gates becomes a hurricane tamer and does it under the auspices of trying to downsize the level of this?
He also wants to minimize the effects of the sun as well. That's another patent we've talked about. He actually has said that. This is not crazy talk from us.
Have they never watched Frankenstein? Like, if you mess with things that you don't understand, sometimes the results are not good. And it's like, you can't just test this stuff, you know?
Well, look at Dubai. Right. I mean, a perfect example in recent memory is earlier this spring in Dubai, right? I mean, they control the weather. The UAE is very open and admitting that they have their weather manipulation program on purpose to cloud seed and rain all through the United Arab Emirates. Massive flooding because they did too much of it. You can't control it in the way that you hope. Even going back to the early days of Project Cirrus and the initial attempts to control the weather, General Electric research labs got out of the business and they were worried about being sued out of existence because of the devastation that they wrought throughout Georgia by manipulating a hurricane, trying to bring its size down. Instead, they raised it up and pushed it right back into Georgia. I mean, this is well documented. You can look it up if you want to do the research. Go ahead, Phil.
Well, David brought up a really good point, and that's your lab setting cannot be the Earth, and since you can't control this in a controlled setting, that's I can't test whether or not this aerosol I have is incredibly toxic to people by just releasing it into a city and seeing what happens. That's not good science.
It's out of control. Yeah. That's a controlled lab environment. But they love testing things on us. I mean, look at what they did with COVID, for crying out loud. Let's use the Earth in order to see how this works out. Let's see what it does to lock down children all over the world. How does that going to... Oh, now we know. Let's put masks on everyone around the world. Let's see how that turns out. Well, now we know.
It's like Oppenheimer. It's like, hey, we're going to blow this up. We could completely destroy if these ions do this, it could destroy all of humanity. But you know what? We're willing to risk it to be in the lead with nuclear weapons.
I love this. I love this super chat from John DeLeo. He says, redacted haters wear masks alone in their cars. Yes, you've seen those people. Yes. If you're a redacted hater, you're probably wearing a mask alone in your car. Anyway, so Bill Gates holds a hurricane modification patent, a hurricane patent that can tame a hurricane. And the patent allows for strengthening and steering of the hurricane. You can read the patent yourself. It allows for the strengthening and steering of the hurricane. Bill Gates holds this patent. But ask yourself, why is Bill Gates, a guy who made billions in technology, suddenly interested in controlling natural disasters? It's not like he's a meteorologist or a climate scientist. So what's the real agenda here?
He's a thief. He stole shrink wrap software.
Yes, from IBM.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why do you think this is? Why exactly? What is the motivation for someone like Bill Gates to be involved in this? Well, could it have anything to do with this, as we talked about yesterday? The 15-minute city project. As we reported yesterday, Tampa Bay had been selected as a new 15-minute city. Among other cities, Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine, there's a list of these 15-minute city projects that are unfolding, and Tampa Bay is set to be one of them. And Bill Gates has a massive investment in Tampa Bay's 15-minute city project, which covers 40 acres of waterfront property. Now, if you haven't heard of 15-minute cities, let me explain. The idea is that everything you need, your job, your grocery store, your entertainment, your education should all be within a 15-minute walk. You don't need to drive a car. Your carbon footprint is too much. You will scan your ID walking along, so we will know all about your movements, your carbon footprint. It will reduce climate change. You won't be driving any kind of fossil fuel car. It all sounds so convenient, right? But here's the thing. This isn't about walkable communities at all. It's all about control, as our friend of the show, Whitney Webb, has so eloquently put it here on our show. And this is exactly what the World Economic Forum wants. You can read all about 15-minute cities right on the World Economic Forum's own website. I encourage you all to go to their website and do it. I won't bore you with it right now. But they actively promote it and they actively want it. They are selling us more automated life, of course, but to what end exactly? Could it be what European MP Christine Anderson warned us about? They want more automation, less autonomy for human beings, and therefore more control of our lives. Here she is talking about this recently to the Epoch Times.
Green certificate, the COVID pass, that was a test balloon to get people to having to produce some kind of a QR code, just getting people used to that. Now what they're slamming us with is these 15-minute cities. Make no mistake, it's not about your convenience. It's not that they want you to be able to, have all of these places that you need to get to very close. And it's not about saving the planet either, by the way. The 15-minute cities, they will have to have those before they can lock you down. And that's what we're talking about here. So in Great Britain, some county already passed legislation. They will be able to impose a climate lockdown. That's the next step. That's what we're talking about. So in order to do that, they will have to have these 15-minute cities. The next.
So she's a member of Parliament, Christine Anderson, and a hero, by the way. So Tampa is one of these cities on the list for this 15-minute city concept, and Bill Gates investing massively into this. So he's going to both try to control the hurricanes on the front end, holding patents on geoengineering, climate control, the strengthening and steering of hurricanes, while also on the back end investing in Tampa's 15-minute city project. Like, that's a brilliant investment, right? Invest on the front end, make a lot of money on the front end, then make a lot of money on the back end. Once this part of the waterfront area of Tampa gets destroyed, and hey, maybe there's a giant land grab, just like we saw in Maui with the giant land grab. We get to swoop in and put in all new walkable 15-minute city test beds. And by the way, I totally forgot to even mention this, but Hawaii specifically is focused on 15-minute cities. Mm-hmm. And so, again, you could go down a conspiracy rabbit hole if you want, but you wipe away complete communities, you have a government land grab, and then you're going to sort of implement these test pilot projects of 15-minute cities. Like, it sounds crazy. Maybe we're nuts. Let us know your thoughts on this and Bill Gates' ownership of this. Well, a couple things. One, that's the plot of the summer blockbuster Twisters. So if you buy it in fiction, you have to buy it in real life, right? It's not so far-fetched. Number two, my kids in middle school had a school assembly to promote 15-minute cities. So it's being pushed in education as something, the wave of the future. Why is that, do you think? Why do they need to warm kids up to this idea if capitalism is not actually naturally creating it? Just a thought. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Indoctrination, trying to get kids to believe that this is the wave of the future. So my nephew, during this assembly, he leaned over to my son and he's like, I bet your parents have a different view on this. He's like, I can't work this out, but I feel like I'm being fed propaganda. I'm going to have to ask Tia about it. And I was so proud. Yes. And then our son came home and he was like, yeah, something didn't sit right with us. I was like, good. Thank you. Thank you for questioning this stuff. Because they try to, couch it as, it's convenience. It's going to help the environment. It's all good for us just to walk everywhere. You don't need a car. It's all about control at the end of the day. Yeah. Let us know your thoughts on all of that.